When my sister-in-law tapped her spoon against the crystal flute to announce she was carrying my husband's child, the entire room froze. My mother's gaze bore into me, expecting tears or a scream. I simply tightened my grip on the leather strap of my handbag. Hidden inside was a DNA test proving his count was exactly 0%. Tonight, amidst the snow and expensive wine, I was not the victim but the executioner. My name is Olivia Hart. I am 34 years old, a senior risk analyst at Helio Vantage Investments, and as I sat at the dining table in my parents' luxury log cabin in Cedar Falls, Colorado, I knew exactly how the night was going to end. The air inside smelled of roasted turkey, pine needles, and expensive cinnamon candles. A 12-foot spruce tree touched the vaulted ceiling, draped in golden lights that shimmered against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, the snow fell in heavy, silent sheets. Inside, Bing Crosby crooned from the hidden wall speakers. It was the picture-perfect American Christmas card my mother, Diane, had spent 40 years curating. My father, Thomas, sat at the head of the heavy oak table, carving the bird with the precision of a man who cared more about the presentation than the meat itself. My parents loved the idea of a successful family more than the reality of us. I could feel my mother's gaze drifting toward me, heavy with that familiar mixture of pity and disappointment. To her, my career in finance was just a placeholder until I provided her with grandchildren. She did not know that the only thing I was birthing tonight was ruin. Ethan sat to my right, my husband, the 38-year-old CEO of Helio Vantage. He looked every bit the golden son-in-law in his crisp white dress shirt with the top button undone and a Swiss watch that cost more than my first car. He laughed at my father's joke, a deep, charming sound that usually disarmed investors, but I was watching his hands. His index finger tapped a frantic, silent rhythm against the tablecloth. He was terrified. I noticed these things because it was my job to notice the tremors before the earthquake. Across from us sat my younger brother, Noah, and his wife, Madison. Noah looked tired, his shoulders slumped under the weight of a failed football career and a lifetime of being bailed out by the family. Madison, however, glowed. She wore a red velvet dress that clung to her frame, her hair styled in loose, glossy waves. She laughed too loudly at Ethan's comments, her hand brushing his forearm with a familiarity that made the air between them thicken. Then there was the wild card, Victor Hale. I had insisted on inviting him. He was a senior board member at Helio Vantage, a man in his 60s with eyes like polished flint. He had survived 3 market crashes and knew the smell of blood better than anyone. My mother thought I was just being charitable to a lonely old man on Christmas. But Victor was not here for the turkey. He was here to witness the fall. The tension at the table snapped when Madison stood up. She picked up her silver spoon and tapped it gently against her crystal champagne flute. The sharp, ringing sound cut through the low hum of conversation. "Excuse me," Madison said, her voice trembling with a rehearsed fragility. I have something I need to say." The table fell silent. My mother clasped her hands together, her eyes lighting up with the anticipation of good news. Noah looked up from his plate, confused. Ethan stopped tapping his finger. He stared at his wine glass as if he could dive into it. Madison placed a manicured hand over her flat stomach. She took a shaky breath. "This is supposed to be a time of miracles," she began, her eyes glistening under the chandelier light. "And I have been blessed with one. I am pregnant." My mother gasped, ready to launch into a speech of congratulations, but Madison held up a hand. The performance was not over. She turned her head slowly toward Noah, her expression shifting to one of tragic apology. "I am so sorry, Noah," she whispered, a tear slipping perfectly down her cheek. "But the baby, it isn't yours." Noah froze, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth. The room seemed to lose all oxygen. Madison turned her gaze to my husband. The father is Ethan. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Noah turned pale, the color draining from his face as he looked from his wife to his brother-in-law. My mother did not look at the adulterers. Instead, her head snapped toward me, her eyes narrowed, filled not with sympathy but with a sharp, accusing judgment. It was the look that said this was somehow my fault for not being woman enough to keep my husband satisfied. Victor Hale did not gasp. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes darting between Ethan and me, calculating the impact this would have on the stock price. And Ethan, he finally looked up. He wore a mask of tortured longing, a man torn between duty and desire. Ethan started, his voice thick with fake emotion. I never meant for this to happen. But a child is a blessing. A man has needs. Olivia. A legacy. They were all waiting for me to shatter. They expected the wailing wife, the overturned table, the begging. I did none of those things. I simply reached for my glass of Pinot Noir and took a slow, deliberate sip. My other hand rested on my designer handbag on the floor. Inside, next to my lipstick, was a DNA test result from a lab in Denver that stated, in undeniable medical terminology, that Ethan Cole had a sperm count of 0. I set my glass down and looked at my husband. "Is that so?" I asked softly. Tonight, in the snowy silence of Cedar Falls, the weak link at the table was about to become the most dangerous person in the room. Before the imported Italian marble and the sprawling deck overlooking the mountains, there was a cramped duplex in a working-class neighborhood of Denver where the walls were thin enough to hear our parents arguing about electric bills. My mother and father were not born into the Cedar Falls aristocracy. They clawed their way there, driven by a singular, suffocating fear of being ordinary. In their desperate climb, they assigned roles to their children that were as rigid as the concrete in our driveway. Noah was the star, the golden ticket who would throw a football straight into the Ivy League. I was the safety net. I was the mechanic who kept the engine running so the driver could look good. I remember the day the hierarchy became permanent. I was 12 years old. Noah was 16 and had just shattered the windshield of Mr. Henderson's Buick with a wild fastball. It was a stupid, reckless accident. But as the sirens wailed in the distance, my mother did not yell at Noah. She gripped my shoulders, her nails digging into my skin through my thin cotton shirt. "You have to say you did it," she hissed, her eyes wide with panic. "The scouts are coming on Saturday. Olivia, if Noah gets a vandalism record, he loses the scholarship. He loses everything. You're just a child. They won't charge you." "But Mom, I was inside reading," I protested, my voice small. "Do not be selfish," she snapped. "This is for the family. You take the blame. You fix this." So I did. I walked out to the police officer and lied, while Noah stood behind the screen door, safe and silent. That was the day I learned that my truth was a currency my parents were willing to spend to purchase my brother's reputation. When a lucky real estate investment finally catapulted us into wealth and moved us to Cedar Falls, the dynamic did not change. It only became more expensive. I buried myself in books, earning my way into a top finance program, grinding through 80-hour weeks in New York before returning to Colorado as a high-earning analyst. I thought my success would finally earn their respect. I was wrong. To Diane and Thomas Hart, my 6-figure salary was merely proof that I was strong enough to carry more weight. Noah, meanwhile, failed to launch. His knee blew out in college, and his discipline blew out shortly after. He lost opportunities to gambling and bad investments when he owed $25,000 to a loan shark in Vegas. I used my first annual bonus to pay it off. I expected a thank you. Instead, my father patted Noah on the back at dinner that night. "It's good you have a sister who can help you out of a jam," he said, pouring Noah a drink. "Family money is for family." Right, I was not a daughter. I was an ATM with a pulse. Then came Madison. She swept into our lives 2 years ago, a self-proclaimed lifestyle influencer with perfectly highlighted hair and a terrifying ability to mirror my mother's vanity. She knew exactly which buttons to press. She called my mother Mom Heart by the second date and asked for her advice on tablecloths. My mother looked at her with an adoration I had starved for my entire life. The contrast was sickening. I was the one quietly transferring $2,000 a month to cover the second mortgage on the parents' cabin so they could maintain their image. I was the anonymous donor keeping the lights on. Yet, when Madison bought my mother a silk scarf that cost perhaps $300, my mother wept with joy. She is just so thoughtful, my mother told me, stroking the fabric. She really understands the heart of this family. The final crack in the foundation happened last year. My father asked me to co-sign a business loan for Noah, using my credit score because Noah's was in ruins. When I hesitated, citing the risk, my father's face went cold. "We gave you everything, Olivia," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "We sacrificed for you. If you can't do this one thing for your brother, then I don't know what kind of daughter you are." I realized then that there was no line they would not cross. If the ship was sinking, they would throw me overboard to keep Noah dry. I was not a member of this family. I was the collateral. And as I sat at the Christmas table years later, watching them fawn over a pregnancy that was a lie, I knew it was finally time to stop paying their debts and start collecting what was owed to me. I met Ethan 5 years ago at a finance seminar in Chicago. He was on stage, pacing back and forth with the energy of a televangelist, delivering a keynote speech about ethics in modern investing. He spoke about transparency, about moral compasses in a sea of greed. I was in the third row, a skeptic by trade, usually immune to corporate charm. But when he looked out at the crowd and spoke about building a legacy based on truth, I felt a pull I could not explain. I fell for the brochure, not the product. We became Cedar Falls' power couple faster than the ink could dry on the society pages. We were the perfect portfolio, the charismatic young CEO and the brilliant risk analyst. We were photographed at charity galas and rooftop cocktail parties. For the first time in my life, someone made me feel seen, not for what I could do for them, but for who I was. "You have a mind like a steel trap, Olivia," Ethan whispered to me one night on the balcony of a fundraising event, his hand warm on the small of my back. "You see the cracks everyone else misses. I need that. I need you." I thought he was confessing love. I did not realize he was conducting a performance review. Our wedding took place at a ski resort in Aspen. It was a lavish affair that cost $75,000, covered extensively by the local lifestyle magazine. My mother cried when she saw me in my dress. "You look absolutely perfect," she sobbed, dabbing her eyes carefully so as not to ruin her mascara. "Finally, Olivia, finally, you've done it right." She wasn't crying for me. She was crying because her daughter was marrying a CEO, and the Hart family stock was finally trading high. But the warmth of the wedding photos did not survive the move into Ethan's glass-walled penthouse. The apartment was sleek, modern, and freezing. Ethan was rarely there. He was always on a plane to London or taking a Zoom call at 2 in the morning. I spent my evenings eating reheated dinners alone, staring at the city lights, receiving texts that read, "Closing a deal. This is for our future." The decision to have a child did not come from a place of warmth. It was a strategic acquisition. Ethan started talking about heirs, about the need for a coal name on the company wall. I wasn't sure I wanted to be a mother, but I was desperate to be a wife. I convinced myself that a baby would anchor him. It became a nightmare of ovulation kits and scheduled intimacy. Month after month, the test strips came back negative. The silence in the penthouse grew heavier. Then, Ethan came home one evening, loosening his tie with a casual arrogance that made my stomach turn. I went to the doctor today, he announced, pouring himself a scotch, just to rule things out. They ran a full panel. I looked up from my laptop, hopeful. And I am perfect, he said, taking a sip. The doctor said my count is high. He said I have the swimmers of a 20-year-old athlete. So, the issue isn't on my end. Live. He said it so smoothly. He placed the entire burden of our infertility squarely on my shoulders. I believed him. I started seeing specialists, taking hormones that made me sick, and feeling like a broken machine. Maybe you're just too stressed, he would say when I got my period. You need to relax. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around, Ethan refused to go to my parents' house. I can't sit there and have your mother ask me about a nursery we can't fill. He told me, adjusting his cufflinks. It's too painful for me. Olivia, you go. Tell them I'm working. He made his avoidance look like grief. I went alone, fielding the pitying looks, feeling guilty for denying my husband a child. I should have noticed the shift in the dynamic sooner. While I was drowning in self-loathing, Ethan began spending more time with the fun side of the family. At barbecues and birthdays, while I was inside helping clean up, Ethan would be out on the patio with Noah and Madison. I would look out the window and see them drinking bourbon, laughing at some private joke. Madison would lean in close to light his cigar, her face glowing with admiration. Your brother is a good kid, Ethan told me once, smelling of smoke and expensive cologne. But he's simple. And Madison, well, she's fun. She doesn't overthink things like you do. I watched them from the kitchen window, feeling a vague sense of exclusion, never realizing that the triangle forming out there on the deck was not just social. It was a conspiracy. I thought I was the beloved wife struggling to give her husband a family. In reality, I was just the obstacle they were waiting to clear. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the facade of my marriage finally cracked. I had come home from the office at 2:30, driven out by a migraine that felt like a railroad spike being driven into my left temple. The penthouse was silent. Ethan had texted me earlier to say he was extending a meeting with European partners and would not be home until late. The apartment was dark, the automated blinds drawn against the harsh Colorado sun. I picked up the central control iPad from the kitchen island to turn on the surround sound, hoping some soft jazz might ease the pounding in my head. As the screen woke up, a notification banner slid across the glass. It was not a system update or a weather alert. It was an email preview, pushed from an account I did not recognize, synced to the family hub by mistake. Re-Christmas reveal, only you and me, from Madison Hart to Ethan, private. The pain in my head vanished instantly, replaced by a sudden, electric clarity. I stared at the screen. My fingers moved before my brain could catch up. I swiped to open the mail app. It asked for a passcode. Without hesitating, I typed in 10/12 October 12th, our wedding anniversary. The lock icon clicked open. I found myself staring at a private inbox I never knew existed. It was a digital graveyard of my marriage. There were dozens of emails between my husband and my sister-in-law, a thread that went back 6 months. My hands did not shake. I felt remarkably steady, like a surgeon preparing to cut. I clicked on the most recent thread. They were scripting it. They were actually writing a script for Christmas Eve. You need to let me speak first. Madison had written at 10 o'clock that morning. I'll do the crying. I'll make it about the miracle. Then you come in. You have to look torn. Ethan, make them feel sorry for you. If Olivia starts screaming, let her. It makes her look unstable. We can use that. I scrolled down. Ethan's reply was short and efficient. Agreed. We lean into the infertility issues. Everyone knows she's been desperate and hormonal. If she flips out, we play it off as a mental break. It builds the case for the custody arrangement later. I just need to be the grieving father who finally got a chance. They were not just having an affair. They were building a narrative. They wanted to paint me as the crazy, barren ex-wife, force me into a disadvantageous divorce settlement while I was emotionally compromised, and keep Ethan's reputation spotless. I put the iPad down gently on the granite counter. I walked into the master bathroom and locked the door. I sat down on the cold tile floor, pulling my knees to my chest. I waited for the tears. I waited for the scream, but nothing came. There was only a cold, hollow silence where my heart used to be. The heat of betrayal had flash-frozen into something much harder. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed Lauren Reyes. Lauren was an ER doctor, my best friend since college, and the only person who could tell the difference between my "I'm fine" voice and my "I'm in trouble" voice. "Hey, Liv." She answered on the second ring, the background noise of the hospital humming behind her. "Everything okay, I found." "I found emails," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "Ethan and Madison. They are planning to announce a pregnancy on Christmas. They have a script. Lauren. They are going to say, I am unstable." There was a pause on the line. "Olivia." Lauren's voice dropped, sharp and urgent. "Listen to me. You need to pack a bag. Right now. Get out of there. Come to my place. Do not let him see you like this." "No," I said. "Liv, please. You can't stay there with him. It's not safe emotionally. I'm not leaving," I whispered, staring at the grout lines on the floor. "If I leave, I'm the victim. I'm the runaway wife. I am a risk analyst. Lauren, I look for patterns. I look for leverage. This is just a case study. Olivia, what are you going to do? I'm going to let them do it," I said. And for the first time, I felt a pulse of adrenaline. I'm going to stay. I'm going to play the weak, tired wife they want me to be, and while they are memorizing their lines, I am going to find out exactly why they are doing this. I hung up the phone. I stood up and looked in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked pale and exhausted, but her eyes were dry. The migraine was gone. The hunt had begun. It started with a question that was simple, brutal, and entirely necessary. Lauren sat across from me at a corner table in a crowded coffee shop 2 towns over, her eyes dark with the fatigue of a double shift, but sharp with suspicion. "Liv, I need you to think back," Lauren said, leaning in over her latte. "Did you ever actually see the paper, the semen analysis results? Did you see the lab report with your own eyes? Or did he just tell you what it said?" I froze. My mind raced back through the last year of appointments, the injections, the tears in the bathroom. I realized with a sick, sinking feeling that I had never seen a single document. I had trusted my husband. That night, Ethan claimed he had a late strategy dinner with investors. The moment the elevator doors slid shut, locking him out, I went into his home office. It was a pristine room of mahogany and leather, smelling of his expensive cedar cologne. I went straight to the filing cabinet in the bottom drawer of his desk. I found a folder labeled medical. Inside, there was a consent to treat form from Summit Ridge Fertility, dated 18 months ago. It had his patient ID number on it, but the results were missing. I remembered a medical power of attorney document we had signed 3 years ago before he took a solo hiking trip in Peru. He had insisted on it for insurance purposes, and he had likely forgotten it existed. I scanned the document, attached a photo of his driver's license, and emailed the records department at Summit Ridge with a flag for urgent processing. 3 days later, a 4-page PDF landed in my secure inbox. I skipped the preamble and went straight to the semen analysis summary. The diagnosis was highlighted in bold, complete azoospermia. I stared at the screen. 0. My husband had been born with a congenital absence of the vas deferens. There were no sperm in his sample. There never had been. The probability of him fathering a child naturally was 0.00%. The first emotion was a relief so profound it felt like a physical weight lifting off my chest. I was not broken. My body was not a failure. The months of hormone injections, the bloating, the mood swings, the crushing guilt of being a defective wife, it was all a lie he had forced me to live. Then came the rage. It was a cold, quiet thing that settled in my marrow. If Ethan knew he was sterile, then he knew with absolute certainty that the baby Madison was carrying could not be his. If the baby was not his, then this entire pregnancy reveal was not just an affair, it was a transaction. I switched tabs on my laptop. I logged into the Helio Vantage remote server. As the senior risk analyst, I had clearance levels that Ethan often forgot about. I bypassed the user-friendly dashboard and went straight into the raw ledger data. I started looking for bleed out. I found it within 20 minutes. There were a series of monthly consulting fees being paid out to two vendors I had never heard of: Timberline Strategies LLC and North Stream Advisory. I needed to be sure. I contacted Gordon Pike, a forensic accountant who operated out of a basement office in Jersey City. Gordon was an old man who smelled of stale tobacco and knew how to follow dirty money better than the IRS. He called me back 48 hours later. "It's sloppy work, Olivia," Gordon rasped over the phone. "They didn't even try to hide it well. Timberline Strategies is registered in Nevada. The managing member is Madison Hart. She's using her maiden name as the registered agent. And North Stream, I asked, gripping the phone. North Stream goes back to a P. Oh. Box in Denver, Gordon said, registered to Noah Hart. The picture was coming into focus, and it was uglier than I could have imagined. Ethan was siphoning money from his own company's operational fund and funneling it directly to my brother and his wife. But the final nail in the coffin was a wire transfer Gordon found dated 2 weeks ago. "There is a lump sum of $350,000, Gordon continued. "It moved from North Stream Advisory to a title company in Cedar Falls. It's labeled as a down payment." I closed my eyes. That was the price of the log cabin my parents had just bought, the dream retirement home they claimed they had saved for decades to afford. They hadn't saved a dime. They were living in a house paid for by embezzled funds, laundered through my brother's shell company. "Thank you, Gordon," I said calmly. "Send me the full dossier." I sat back in my chair in the silent penthouse. My entire family, my parents, my brother, my sister-in-law were all on Ethan's payroll. They were helping him gaslight me, isolate me, and eventually discard me, and he was buying their loyalty with company money. They thought they were set for life. They did not realize that by accepting that money, they had handed me the weapon I needed to destroy them all. I carried the dossier to the office of Elena Monroe, the sharpest divorce attorney in Denver. Elena was known for two things: her exorbitant retainer fees and her ability to dismantle high-net-worth men with the precision of a butcher. She read through the documents I placed on her glass desk in silence, her face unreadable. When she finished, she took off her reading glasses and looked at me. "You do not just have a divorce case here, Olivia," Elena said, her voice low and serious. "You have an SEC violation bomb. This is corporate fraud." She tapped a finger on the Helio Vantage shareholder agreement I had included. "This clause right here," she pointed out, "the direct heir provision. It states that the CEO position is locked and additional voting shares are granted upon the birth of a biological heir. Without an heir, the board, specifically Victor Hale, can call for a vote of no confidence and oust him. Ethan is on thin ice with the board. He needs this baby to secure his throne." The full scope of Ethan's plan finally crystallized. It was elegant in its cruelty. He uses Madison to produce a child. He claims it is his miracle baby. He secures his voting rights and his millions. Simultaneously, he paints me as the bitter, infertile woman who lost her mind with jealousy, forcing me into a quiet settlement where I sign away my shares to protect my privacy. He wins the company. He keeps the money. He gets the girl. "So I file now," I said, my hands clenching in my lap. "I take this to the police." "No," Elena said sharply. "If you file now, he will scramble. He will cook the books, delete the emails, and claim the money transfers were personal loans. He will spin the narrative before you even get to court. You need him to hang himself. You need him to state, on public record, in front of witnesses, that this child is his. Christmas, I whispered. Exactly. Elena nodded. Let him make the announcement. Let him lie to Victor Hale's face. Once he claims paternity of a child that cannot biologically be his to defraud the company, that is when you strike. She leaned forward. But we need more than the medical records. Those are private. He could claim they were forged or that he was cured. You need DNA. You need to prove that the child Madison is carrying has zero genetic link to him. I can do that, I said. Then the reality of the collateral damage hit me. My parents, I said, looking out the window at the Denver skyline. And Noah, they took the money. Elena, if I expose the money trail, they go down with him. They could face charges for receiving stolen funds, money laundering. Elena looked at me with a gaze that was not unkind, but entirely practical. They made their choice. Olivia, they took the check, and listen to me very closely. If you do not expose them, Ethan will own them. He will use their complicity to blackmail them into testifying against you. He will say, "Help me destroy Olivia," or "I tell the IRS about the cabin." Do you understand? You cannot save people who have already sold you out. Her words hit me like a slap. I thought of my mother's critical eyes, my father's cold demands, Noah's selfishness. For 34 years, I had been the glue holding them together. If I stayed silent now, I would just be the cement in their foundation of lies. I choose the truth, I said. The words tasted like ash, but they were steady. Good. Elena said, now we need a fail-safe. If something happens to you, if he finds out and tries to stop you, this information needs to get out. A dead man's switch, I said. Create a scheduled email, she instructed. Load everything, the medical records, the bank transfers, the emails between him and Madison. Set it to send to Victor Hale, the SEC, and the district attorney's office at 8:15 on Christmas night. If you don't cancel it, the bomb drops automatically. I spent the next hour signing legal authorizations. I gave Elena and Gordon power of attorney to act if I went missing. For the first time in my life, I wasn't signing my name to co-sign a loan for Noah or to approve a mortgage for my parents. I was signing to build a fortress around myself. You are going to have to be an actress. Olivia, Elena warned me as I stood up to leave. You have to go back to that house, smile at the woman sleeping with your husband, and let your family break your heart one last time. Can you do that? I thought of the empty nursery in my penthouse. I thought of the years of feeling like a failure. I won't just act. I said, I'll give the performance of a lifetime. The Sunday brunch before Christmas was a masterclass in deception. We were gathered in my parents' sun-drenched dining room, the table laden with quiche and fruit tarts. Madison was the center of the universe, holding up a grainy black-and-white ultrasound photo like it was a holy relic. Look, she cooed, tilting the image toward my mother. The doctor said he has Ethan's brow line. Even this early, you can tell he is going to be a leader. My mother gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. Everyone laughed, a warm, familial sound that made my skin crawl. I sat silently, buttering a piece of toast, cataloging every word. Every claim of resemblance was a brick in the prison they were building for themselves. Madison was drinking herbal lemon tea. She held the delicate porcelain cup with both hands, taking small, theatrical sips. When she finished, she set it down on a coaster, the rim stained with a distinct crescent of her pink lipstick. Let me clear the table, I said, standing up before anyone else could move. Oh, sit down, Olivia. My mother chided. You look exhausted. Let Noah do it. No, really, I insisted, forcing a tired smile. I need to move around. My back is killing me. I gathered the plates, stacking Madison's saucer on top. I walked into the kitchen, away from their line of sight. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I pulled a sterile swab from the inside of my sleeve, part of a kit Lauren had smuggled to me. I ran the cotton tip firmly along the lipstick stain on the rim of Madison's cup, collecting the saliva and skin cells. I dropped the swab into a small biohazard bag, zipped it shut, and shoved it deep into my pocket. Collecting Ethan's sample was more dangerous. 2 nights later, I lay awake in bed, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. He was in a deep sleep, likely exhausted from a day of falsifying financial projections. I slipped out of the covers and retrieved the second kit from my nightstand drawer. I needed hair with the follicle attached. I moved to his side of the bed. My hand hovered over his head. If he woke up, I would have to claim I was stroking his hair out of affection, a lie that would taste like bile. I found a loose strand near his temple and pulled. He stirred, grunting. Liv, shh, I whispered, smoothing his forehead with my other hand. Just a gray hair. Honey, go back to sleep. He rolled over. I exhaled a breath I had been holding for a minute. I sealed the hair in its own bag. Lauren had directed me to a private genetic lab in Arizona that specialized in anonymous paternity testing. I mailed the samples the next morning using a prepaid shipping label under the name Jane Doe. I paid for everything with a Visa gift card I had bought with cash at a grocery store. There would be no paper trail leading back to Olivia Hart. The waiting period was a strange purgatory. By day, I was the compliant, depressed wife. I let my shoulders slump. I wore little makeup. I let Ethan catch me staring blankly out the window. He thrived on it. The weaker I looked, the more careless he became. One evening, pouring himself a drink, he looked at me with a terrifying sort of pity. You know, Liv, he said, swirling the amber liquid. When I have a son, the company will be secure for another generation. The trust requires a male heir to unlock the Class A voting shares. It's a lot of pressure, but it's for the greater good. He had never mentioned the Class A shares before. He was so confident in my defeat that he was handing me the motive on a silver platter. I nodded, pretending to hold back tears, while mentally filing away the exact clause I needed to highlight for the SEC. The email arrived on my secure phone 4 days later. I sat in my car in the office parking garage, the engine idling. I opened the attachment. Subject Genetic Comparison Report, .ID 99283. I scrolled past the technical markers to the conclusion at the bottom. Probability of paternity 0.00%. Conclusion. The alleged father is excluded as the biological parent of the fetus. I zoomed in on that number. 0.00. It wasn't just a statistic. It was a key. It didn't matter who the real father was, whether it was a gym trainer, an old boyfriend, or a stranger. I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was that it wasn't Ethan. And since Ethan knew he was sterile, his public claim of paternity was a knowing, willful act of fraud to seize control of a billion-dollar company. I called Elena immediately. I have it. I said, Good. She replied, We don't need to find the real father. Olivia, that is Madison's problem. Our case rests on the fact that Ethan is lying to shareholders. Print it. I went to a print shop across town. I printed 2 copies on heavy, formal paper. I placed one in a thick envelope that would sit on the Christmas dinner table. The second copy I folded and placed in the inner zippered pocket of my handbag, right next to my passport and a flash drive containing the financial records. It was my insurance policy. If they tried to kick me out, if they tried to silence me, I had the truth strapped to my side. I walked out into the cold winter air, clutching my bag. For the first time in months, the bitter wind didn't bother me. I was ready for Christmas. The week leading up to Christmas, I became a ghost in my own home. I spent hours sitting by the floor-to-ceiling window in the living room, wearing no makeup, staring blankly at the falling snow while Ethan watched me from the doorway. He thought he was seeing a broken woman, a wife crushed by infertility and the weight of her own inadequacy. He did not know that inside my head, I was not mourning. I was counting down. Ethan began to lay the groundwork for his exit strategy with terrifying gentleness. He would sit next to me on the sofa, sighing heavily, and place a hand on my knee. "I have taken so much pain for us, Olivia," he said one evening, his voice low and practiced. "A man has needs, a legacy to think about. Maybe we need to be brave enough to admit that our paths are going in different directions." I forced my chin to tremble. I let a single tear slide down my cheek. "I just want you to be happy, Ethan," I whispered. He squeezed my knee, hiding his relief. He thought the hard part was over. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed with a text from Madison. She had sent me a link to a blog post titled "Learning to Let Go So He Can Fly," accompanied by a message. I saw this and thought of you. "Be brave. Sweetie. Sometimes love means walking away." I stared at the screen, marveling at the audacity. She was coaching me on how to divorce her lover so she could take my place, I replied with a single red heart emoji. 2 days before the drive to Cedar Falls, I made the call that would seal the trap. I phoned Victor Hale. "Victor," I said, keeping my voice bright and brittle, "Ethan really wants you to come to the cabin for Christmas dinner. He has a major announcement regarding the future of the company. He wants you there to hear it first." There was a pause on the line. Victor was a shark. He could smell blood in the water from miles away. He knew Helio Vantage's numbers were wobbling. "An announcement," Victor repeated slowly. "I will be there. Olivia." I arrived at my parents' cabin a day early to help with the preparations. The house was magnificent, a sprawling structure of timber and stone that smelled of fresh pine and money. My parents were in a frenzy of decoration, hanging wreaths and polishing silver. They looked at the house with the pride of ownership, blissfully ignoring the fact that the $350,000 down payment had been stolen from the company their son-in-law managed. I felt a cold detachment as I watched them. They were so happy in their ignorance. On Christmas Eve, I found Noah in the garage, waxing his truck. He looked older than his 28 years, his face puffy from too much drinking. "Maddie is acting weird," Noah muttered, scrubbing a spot on the fender. "She is glowing, but she won't let me touch her. Says she feels sensitive." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for reassurance. "Hey, Liv," he continued, lowering his voice. "I wanted to say thanks. Ethan got me that consulting gig, the logistics consulting. The checks from North Stream have really saved my ass. I finally feel like I'm contributing." My stomach turned. My brother wasn't just a cuckold. He was a mule. He was laundering the money that Ethan was stealing to support the woman who was carrying Ethan's fake child. "That is great." "Noah," I said, my voice flat. "I am glad you are getting paid what you deserve." I went upstairs to the guest room and opened my laptop. It was time. I logged into my private email server. I drafted a new message with the subject line, "Confidential financial and legal disclosures regarding Ethan Cole." I attached every file: the semen analysis, the DNA test results from the cup and the hair, the bank transfer records from Helio Vantage to North Stream and Timberline, and the email thread between Ethan and Madison scripting their affair. I added the recipients Victor Hale, the Securities and Exchange Commission tip line, and the District Attorney's Fraud Division. I set the scheduled send time for 8:15 in the evening on Christmas Day, right in the middle of dinner. Even if Ethan snatched the papers from my hand, even if they physically threw me out into the snow, the truth was going to hit the servers of every regulatory body in the country. On Christmas evening, I dressed for the slaughter. I chose a deep emerald green velvet dress with long sleeves and a high neck. It was elegant, severe, and commanding. I painted my lips a dark, blood-red crimson. I stared at myself in the mirror. The sad, barren wife was gone. The woman looking back at me was a risk analyst who had finally finished her assessment. I picked up my leather handbag. I checked the inner pocket one last time. The envelope with the DNA test was there. The USB drive was there. I turned off the lights in the room and walked to the elevator. As the door slid open, I stepped inside, my heels clicking sharply against the floor. I was not going downstairs to eat turkey. I was going downstairs to burn the house down. The silence in the room stretched thin and tight as Madison finished her performance. She stood there, hand resting protectively over her stomach, looking like a martyr for love. From my seat, I watched the room digest the news. Victor Hale was not looking at the pregnant woman with warmth. His eyes were narrowed, his fingers drumming a silent, calculating rhythm on the tablecloth. My mother, however, tilted her head to the side, her eyes wide and hungry for the drama. She was not horrified by the infidelity. She was energized by it. Ethan moved into his part of the script seamlessly. He reached out and covered my hand with his palm damp with sweat. "I am so sorry, Olivia," Ethan said, his voice cracking perfectly. I never wanted to hurt you, but the pain of wanting a child and knowing we couldn't, it broke something in me. Madison gave me the one thing you couldn't. A man has a legacy to protect." My mother let out a sharp, ragged breath and turned on me. The accusation in her eyes was immediate and vicious. "You drove him to this," my mother hissed, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "You were always so cold, Olivia, always caring more about your career and your meetings than your home. If you had been a real wife, if you had made this home warm, he wouldn't have had to look for comfort in his own family." Across the table, Noah sat like a statue carved from ash. His face was a mask of humiliation. He was trapped in a nightmare where he was the man who couldn't keep his wife. But as he looked at Ethan, I saw the hesitation. He remembered the checks from North Stream. He remembered the debts paid. He was paralyzed by the realization that his pride had a price tag, and Ethan had already bought it. The entire table waited for me to break. They wanted the tears. They wanted the exit. Instead, I stood up. I smoothed the front of my velvet dress and picked up my wine glass. I took a slow sip, savoring the expensive vintage, and then set the glass down with a deliberate click. "If tonight is the night for the truth," I said, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the tension like a scalpel, "then perhaps we should tell the whole version, not just the half you rehearsed." I picked up my handbag from the floor and placed it on the empty chair beside me. I reached into the inner pocket and pulled out the first heavy cream envelope. I walked around the table, the heels of my shoes sinking silently into the plush rug, until I stood directly behind Ethan. I dropped the envelope onto his plate, right on top of the untouched turkey. "Open it," I commanded. Ethan stared at the envelope. He did not move. "Open it," I said, louder this time. He tore the seal with trembling fingers. He pulled out the document. I did not wait for him to read it. I recited the conclusion from memory, pitching my voice so that Victor could hear every syllable. "Probability of paternity," I announced, 0.00%. The alleged father, Ethan Cole, is excluded as the biological parent. Madison let out a screech that shattered the atmosphere. "That is a lie," she screamed, her face twisting into something ugly. You printed that off the internet. That is fake. You are just jealous because I have what you never could." I turned to Victor, ignoring her completely. "That document comes from Gene Verify Labs in Arizona," I said calmly. "It is a certified legal document with a verified chain of custody. The sample was taken from your teacup, Madison, and Ethan's hairbrush. It is auditable in court." I reached into my bag again. "But that is just the science," I continued, pulling out the second envelope. "This is the history." I slammed the second packet down in front of Ethan. This was the one that would destroy him. "Read the highlighted section." "Ethan," I said, leaning down close to his ear. "Complete azoospermia. You were born without the ability to produce sperm. You have known this for years." I looked up at my parents, who were staring at me in horror. For 18 months, he watched me inject myself with hormones. I told them, my voice cold. He watched me cry in the bathroom. He watched me feel like a failure of a woman. He let me take the blame for our infertility, all while knowing that he was sterile. He isn't a man looking for a legacy. He is a fraud who tortured his wife to cover his own secrets. Ethan looked small. The golden boy facade had dissolved, leaving behind a sweating, terrified liar. I turned my back on him and faced Victor Hale, and that was just the private matter. I said, locking eyes with the board member. Now, Victor, we need to talk about the money. We need to talk about Timberline, North Stream, and exactly who paid for this house we are standing in. I did not give them time to recover from the biological shock before I delivered the financial blow. I pulled a stack of bank statements from my bag and fanned them out across the table like a winning poker hand. Follow the money, I said, my voice echoing in the silent room. Here are the wire transfers from the Helio Vantage Operational Fund. They go directly to Timberline Strategies, a shell company registered to Madison, and here are the transfers to North Stream Advisory, registered to NOAA. And finally, here is the wire for $350,000 from North Stream to the title company that closed on this cabin last week. My parents stared at the papers. The blood drained from my father's face as he realized the retirement paradise he was boasting about was nothing more than a crime scene. Victor Hale picked up the papers. He scanned them with the speed of a man who had read balance sheets for 40 years. He did not look angry. He looked vindicated. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. I received an anonymous tip about irregular outflows 2 weeks ago, Victor said, his voice deadly calm. I didn't want to believe it. But this is not just a family dispute. Ethan, this is embezzlement. This is grand larceny. This is a federal crime. Ethan scrambled up from his chair, knocking his wine glass over. Red wine stained the white tablecloth like a gunshot wound. It is a misunderstanding, Ethan stammered, his hands shaking violently. It was a temporary loan. An accounting error, I can fix it. Victor, I just needed liquidity for... It is too late for that, I interrupted, glancing at my watch. At 8:15 this evening, an automated email was sent from my server. Copies of these bank records, the DNA test, and your emails scripting this entire fraud were sent to the entire board of directors, the SEC, and the district attorney. Noah picked up the North Stream document. His hands were trembling. North Stream, he whispered. I signed those papers. You told me it was consulting fees. You told me it was legitimate work. He turned slowly to Madison. The realization of his own foolishness was finally dawning on him. And the baby Noah asked, his voice cracking, if it isn't Ethan's, and we haven't slept together in 4 months, whose is it? Madison the trainer. That guy from the Club Madison burst into tears. But nobody looked at her. My mother, realizing the walls were closing in, finally spoke. But she did not reach for me. She did not apologize. She looked at the ceiling of the beautiful log cabin she was about to lose. My house, she sobbed, turning a hateful glare toward me. You did this, Olivia. You couldn't just leave it alone. You had to ruin everything. You are so cruel to your own family. For the first time in my life, her disapproval did not sting. It felt like a gentle breeze against a stone wall. I am not cleaning this up, I told her. I am done being the janitor for this family's mess. The doorbell rang. It was not a carol singer. It was heavy, authoritative pounding. 2 federal financial agents and 3 local police officers stepped into the foyer, shaking the snow from their boots. Victor had clearly made a call the moment he saw the papers. Ethan Cole, one of the agents announced, stepping into the dining room. We have a warrant for your arrest regarding securities fraud and embezzlement. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut was louder than any Christmas carol. Ethan was shoved toward the door, his face twisted in a rictus of hate. He twisted his head back to look at me. You ruined my life, he screamed, spitting the words. You vindictive, barren bitch. You broke this family. I stood by the door, clutching my coat tight against the draft. I didn't break anything. Ethan, I said softly. I just turned on the lights so everyone could see the cracks you made. I walked out onto the front porch. The air was biting cold, but it felt clean. Behind me, I could hear my mother wailing and Madison trying to explain herself to a police officer. I stepped off the porch and onto the snowy path. I did not look back at the cabin, or the Christmas tree, or the people who had used me for decades. I walked toward my car, alone, with 0% of the burden I had carried in with me. I drove away into the white, silent night, and for the first time in 34 years, the road ahead belonged entirely to me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on my decision. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.